Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, all good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for organizing this event. I would like to talk about the Palestinian dictionary because I think that in Palestine are not innocent. So let me begin with something that should be obvious, yet it's constantly heard. In the Palestinian story, language has never been neutral because everyone describes us, our history, our present, our aspirations has always been filtered through layers of power, of fear, and geopolitical convenience. Can you hear me?
Yes, all good. A little bit of echo, but we can hear you.
Okay.
Maybe if you can put some earphones,
every
that
word,
could be better.
so I said every word that describes us, whether it's our history, our present, or our aspirations, dreams, has been always filtered through layers of power, fear, and geopolitical convenience. So even the simplest truth about Palestine become distorted the moment they leave our mouth and enter the machinery of international discourse. Actually, I've spent years watching how our reality is diluted by language and pretends to be balanced, objective, or technical. Because I have been working in many sectors like humanitarian sector, business sector, etc. And in truth, this language performs a quiet violence of its own. It distances, it anesthetizes, and transforms a century-long disposition into a string of very polite euphemism. So this is why I believe that we urgently need a tool that restores clarity and sovereignty. But this is not my idea, actually. I attended a conference on Palestine. It was in Turkey with a university in Palestine, and we discussed this project of having a Palestinian dictionary, a Palestinian dictionary of political expressions. It's not a glossary of slogans, it's not a militant catechism, but a way of reclaiming the vocabulary that has been taken from us. And it's a way of rebuilding the architecture of meaning that defines our struggle. So first of all, I would like to talk why this dictionary. And I think that language has become one of our battlegrounds because for too long, the words used to describe our lives have always belonged to others. Diplomats, spokespersons, so-called experts, journalists, think tank analysts, many of them speak about us with a vocabulary that erases the core of our experience. So, for example, these words, conflict, as if two equal sides stood facing each other, or talking about tensions, as if this position, were an atmospheric phenomenon. Security, as if the fears of the colonizer outweighed the rights of the colonized. Many times you hear in the news regrettable or renewed escalation, as if the destruction of homes were an unfortunate accident. And also we've heard during this genocide in Gaza, civilians caught in crossfire, as if, we die by coincidence. So these words do not describe reality, they just manage the whole situation. And they produce a safe distance between the truth and those who prefer not to confront the truth. We have absorbed, unfortunately, some of these terms ourselves as Palestinians, sometimes without even noticing. So many people you would hear from our community who would talk about conflict. And once we speak the language of others, we risk losing the ability to articulate our own political imagination. So the second part I would like to talk about is naming is important because it's the first act of liberation. You know, a people begins to liberate itself the moment it names the word in its own terms. But Palestinians have rarely been allowed to do so. So even the word Palestine has been questioned, reduced, or qualified as if our existence always required permission. So meanwhile, the vocabulary imposed on us has shaped the global understanding. What does it mean to talk about right to defend itself, counterterrorism, how to be neutral, etc. So our own words are constantly pushed to the margins. And what are our own words? For example, resistance. It's something that becomes suspect internationally. Return becomes unrealistic. How can you talk about return? Apartheid becomes uncomfortable. We cannot talk about apartheid. And Nakba is always controversial, almost always controversial. So this erosion is not accidental. It is, the linguistic extension of a political colonial project. So I think that a Palestinian dictionary would be an act of defiance against this erosion. And it is a way of saying our experience cannot be translated into the vocabulary of those who deny it. We can name ourselves, we will define our reality, and we will reclaim our narrative. So the third part I would like to talk about is what this dictionary should contain, because I think when I thought about it, it should contain three essential layers. The first one is the words of history. So we need clear, precise definitions rooted in truth, not diplomatic comfort. For example, Nakba is not a tragedy. It's the deliberate dispossession of a whole people. Occupation is not disputed territory. It's a military settler colonial regime. A refugee is not a humanitarian label. It is the product of an ongoing political crime. And these are not, abstractions. These are the foundations of our lived reality. The second layer would be the words of power. So these are the terms that have shaped global perceptions of us, like often in ways that discipline or delegitimize. For example, security has always been used and is still being used to justify perpetual domination and killing. Incitement, it's used in Europe, especially where I live, used to police any speech that stands with Palestine. Normalization is a word that requires careful, precise definition to protect our political integrity. Humanitarian crisis, you keep on hearing about humanitarian crisis in Gaza. It's used to avoid confronting the reality, the political causes of the suffering in Gaza and of the genocide. And now, we have a conference. I work at the Arab Center for Political Research, and we have a conference in next week about Europe and Palestine, and it's the conference about the colonization of Palestine. And today there was an article in Le Point in Paris that describes us all as not moderate people. So they want us to invite moderate Arabs that can talk about, can use these expressions that we like to hear in the West. So we must dissect how these terms function and how they silence, reshape, and distort, our Palestinian agency. And the third layer is the words of the future. Like our dictionary must also name the political horizon and the legal perspective that we are moving forward, like justice, equality, return, decolonization, one democratic state. And these expressions should not remain, like just vague aspirations. We must define them clearly with rigor and imagination, not only for ourselves, but for the whole world that we want to build ahead. So my fourth part of this presentation, because there are 5 parts. The fourth one is why now? Because we think that Palestinians are being, and we have seen it during this genocide, Palestinians are being spoken about more often and even much more than they are being heard. You know, we live in a moment where Palestinians produce more knowledge, journalism, testimonies, archives, even analysis that at any point in our history, but still much of the world still approaches us through a conceptual framework that was not built by us and not for us. You know, we are always represented by people who should be, you know, from the West and who don't know and who don't believe in our reality. And if we are invited once in the media or in a workshop or in a conference to talk about Palestine, so our words are usually filtered. We can talk a little bit about our suffering, but we can never analyze the situation. We're not allowed. It's always, you know, we need someone from the West to analyze the whole situation. And our experiences are sanitized before being made acceptable. Our political vocabulary is not accepted, or it is blurred, you know, until it loses its power. So the dictionary of Palestine should be a way to break that cycle. And it would help us to first reclaim intellectual clarity, to second, to challenge the linguistic frames that depolitize the Palestine question. Third, to articulate our struggle as one of rights, justice, and liberation. And finally, to speak from the position of historical subjects, not humanitarian objects. So that's what I think why it is important. And finally, the last part I would like to talk about is how can this connect to the vision of one democratic state? So if we want to imagine a political future beyond fragmentation, beyond all the ruins of Oslo and useless negotiations, beyond apartheid, we really need a new language. Not the language of fear, not the language of resignation, not the language that has confined us to a humanitarian category for many, many decades. So a just, democratic, decolonized future requires new definitions of citizenship, precise descriptions of reality, a grounded understanding of return, and a political vocabulary capable of shaping a shared horizon. Because if we leave these words undefined, they will remain slogans. But if we define them ourselves, they become the scaffolding of a new political paradigm. So, in conclusion, words shape what we are thinking now. What is possible? Because for decades we have lived inside a dictionary authored by others, people from you know, the other word. Usually it's from people from the West that are still colonizing us. So a dictionary in which our suffering is softened, our resistance is criminalized, our future is restricted to the narrow confines of political convenience, of humanitarian aid. This should not continue. We need a Palestinian dictionary of political expressions. And it's not an academic exercise, it's a form of liberation, I think. It's a refusal to be spoken for, a refusal to be translated into someone else's comfort, and a refusal to let the narrative of our disposition be written in a language that hides its violence. So this dictionary should say, we reclaim our words, we reclaim our history, we reclaim the horizon of what we want our future to be. And, you know, sometimes the first revolution begins with a word, with a definition, clarification of events. So just to give you an example, what am I thinking of? Because maybe this sounds a bit, you know, not clear, or, you know, just an example. For example, if we talk about a dictionary, we can divide it into first history, memory, colonial structures. Like, for example, how would we define the Nakba? Nakba, it's the 1948 catastrophe, the systemic expulsion and dispossession of Palestinians to establish a Jewish majority state. How do we define, settler colonialism? It's a political project that seeks to replace an indigenous population with a new one through removal, confinement, killing, and erasure. Stuff like what is a Palestinian refugee? This is a person displaced by the Nakba and their descendants. It is a political status and not a humanitarian one. This is, of course, just short, examples, but it needs lots of work. A right of return, absentee property, which is the legal mechanism used to confiscate Palestinian land and homes by labeling the original owners as absent. Then we can also have a section on structures of oppression in this dictionary, like occupation. What is occupation? Occupation is a military settler colonial regime controlling land, movement, resources, and political life. What is apartheid? What is a siege, blockade, checkpoint, which is clearly a tool of surveillance and fragmentation that polices Palestinian movement and reinforces control, etc., etc. Then we can also talk about the political vocabulary, a section on political vocabulary. For example, what is resistance, which is the legitimate struggle of an oppressed people against colonial domination in all its forms. What is liberation, what is self-determination, etc., etc. Then I think one important section in this dictionary should be the media, language, and representation, because we have seen this, especially during the genocide and even before, how media is distorting every single event that is happening in Palestine, whether in Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem, or even in 48 Palestine. So one of these examples would be, Hasbara. What is Hasbara? It is a state-organized propaganda aimed at shaping international opinion through narrative warfare. What does it mean to say dehumanization? It's the discursive practice of portraying Palestinians as lesser, disposable, or threatening, etc., etc. So I think I really dream of having this dictionary one day, and happy to answer your questions, because unfortunately I have to leave before the end of this session. Thank you very much.